Okay, I have to tell you all about my excitement for this panel. When Zach and I first decided that this was a conference that we wanted to host, it was really important to us that we had some programming not only on, let's just call it the practical business case for using AI in the future of work, and by that I mean, how can we use these tools to be more productive and engaged and connected at work, but we also wanted to put some programming more towards, let's just say, maybe some of the theoretical and societal implications of what it looks like when we use these tools moving forward, and wanting to make sure we are good moral stewards of how these tools are consumed and developed, so that we're creating a world that's a little bit more just and compassionate, and not one that's exacerbating inequalities. And so I bring all this up because one of the very first people we spoke to about this, let's just say this goal, was one of our panelists here, Katie Grillert from Assessed Intelligence. And I can't wait for you to hear her voice, to hear Fatima's voice. And a huge thank you to our friend and partner, Daniel, for being our moderator. So these topics can sometimes feel heavy because there's so much unknown in the future. And I also think instead of moving away from that, that oftentimes leaning into it and kind of exploring those underlying questions and those feelings of angst can only lead to healthy outcomes, because then we're more proactive in talking about it. We can lead with intentionality and all kind of move forward together. So with that, it is my great privilege to introduce our moderator for the panel, Daniel Raffield. So Daniel is a consultant and a how activator at Karrikins Group, who partners with leaders to create alignment, unlock growth, and drive lasting behavior change. With a background in organizational transformation, he supports senior leaders across global, mid-market, and emerging organizations as they bring ambitious strategies to life. His work focuses on helping leaders remove barriers, strengthen ways of working, and build the clarity and connection needed to accelerate performance and long-term success. Everyone, please join me first in welcoming Daniel.
Thank you, thank you. I just want to actually say thank you to Nick and Zach for picking the exact same carpet in my living room. It really feels a little bit more natural as well. And I'm sorry, it's my carpet, but I'll hand it over at the end of the day. One of the things I really love is we get to see AI really shape culture and really start to influence leadership behaviors, because we're living that right now. So I just want to put a little bit of the hype down, just have a really, really good conversation, think through the risks, think through the opportunities, and ask what's the art of the possible and what do we need to start considering. So without further ado, I've got two amazing panelists here. I'd love to introduce to you Fatima Khan. She's the Principal Organizational Development Partner at Abbott, a global healthcare company using technology to help people live healthier lives. She spent years creating spaces where people actually feel like they belong, even when everything around them begins to shift. Also, if I can get a tiny bit of a little snap going on here, she's a new mom as well. Pretty fantastic. Yeah. Or a clap. Claps work as well. Further left, over here, you've already heard her kind of being propped up a little bit there, but hopefully I'll give her some ado as well. Katie Gilliard, the Chief Strategy Officer at Assessed Intelligence, an AI governance and cybersecurity firm. Katie is this scientist turned ethnicist, right, that works in how we lead AI governance and in some of the biggest high-stakes industries. If you talk to her for 5 minutes, you'll also start to feel what are these passion projects of her, which is, how do we put humans before technology, not the other way around. So, Katie, kick us off here. What really powers you? What's at the heart of the work you do with AI?
You already spoke to that. I am very passionate about making sure that AI works for people. I am really excited to get to do that every day in my day job. Part of that is working with organizations to help them think through their design process, through their implementation, how they're going to manage and monitor their risks, who they're thinking about when they are bringing AI into their process. And also, you talked about passion projects. I always have a lot of those. And AI for Good is one of those. So building systems where you are using AI to help people have more equitable outcomes. And one of the ways I do that is with a financial inclusion platform that my team is working on. So at the end of the day, I want to advance human rights. I want AI to be something that is not a tool that uses us. I think we talked about earlier the comments today, but that we're using it to shape the society that we want to see.
Fatima, what's at the heart of the work you do around people and organizations?
Yes, thank you. Can you all hear me? Yeah, okay. That's a good question. You know, when I first came to CulturCon a handful of years ago, I used to jokingly say, you know, my dream job is to be a Chief Happiness Officer. But truly that is, jokingly, that's a core why I do what I do. It's really about making sure that the people that I work with feel seen, heard, and valued within the workplace. And that's not often the case, but it can be. And so in my career in Dane County and beyond, it's been very much focused on, half of it's been in the nonprofit sector and the other half in the healthcare sector. And so very passionate about access to healthcare, employee engagement efforts, and then diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a lot of what we'll be talking about today is really that, making sure that humans are at the center of the conversations that we're having. And I'm super excited. And I know Katie and I spent some time right outside the hall right before this talking. And so super excited to have this conversation, which I think is so needed. In a space where so many folks are so excited about AI and jumping to being more and more efficient. But what are we missing when we speed up a little too quick?
Yeah, let's go a little deeper in the humans at the center, right? What are the behaviors are you seeing emerge, or norms you're seeing in organizations that perhaps people haven't even started to notice yet?
Sure. So, I mean, in preparation for this conversation too, and I know Nick and Zach were in the conversation as well, but how many of us have received an email that we know was written by AI, right? Just about every hand went up, right? I've gotten emails that say dear, and it still has a blank, enter your name, right? And so when I think about the work that I do, a lot of it is about authenticity. And a lot of what is being lost is that authenticity and the empathy that we see in leadership. And so before we jump to a lot of, let's just use it to be more efficient, how do we take those intentional pauses to ask ourselves, can we or should we? And do we need it for every single instance, every single email that we send out? I see people writing thank yous using ChatGPT, or condolence emails. Truly, like, how do we keep empathy in the work that we do? I've also seen, there's a lot of research out there, and I think I wrote down a statistic about it was a Pew Research study that said 53% of individuals that are using AI have seen a decline in their own creative thinking abilities. And so, again, how much are we letting AI dictate decisions versus us using our own judgment? And I think that's something that we really need to take those intentional pauses throughout the work that we do to really question that.
Yeah, I'm hearing a little underlying trust problem as well, right? Katie, could you speak about that a little bit? How do you think you could develop that a little bit more?
Yeah, so that's that output when you're using the AI to kind of replace, sometimes augment, sometimes replace that conversation. You can even back up with that and think about, well, where was that human within the whole design and development of the system? So what kind of data was going into that, and who was making the choices on what the guardrails are, or what the tone is going to be, what sort of information is going to be allowed to go through that system? Then who is using it, and what does that actually look like at each stage with the human, and was that considered? And I think a lot of the times we are really excited about making something and forget about all of the little pieces that are supporting it, because tech is not value neutral. The value's built in through all of those choices.
Well, I think that's a term we all need to write down, value neutral, right? I've got a little bit of a banger question to kind of kick us off into this social sphere space. If we could think about one thing that AI really just felt unimaginable a few years ago, but is starting to feel possible, what would that be?
It's a totally wild question. I mean, what I thought was possible 6 months ago is now possible. The rate at which the technology is advancing and the better performance is really impressive, also really scary. It has the capacity to be in every facet of our lives. It's in a lot of them. And so I think what might have been imaginable maybe pre-generative AI is now how we could think of generative AI being in everything. And do we want that? I use it, it's helpful, it's great, but what ways do we want to shape that?
Well, are there barriers there? Are there barriers we need to consider as well while we're also thinking about what's possible?
Yes, there's a lot of barriers there. Going back to that idea of, if we're using these large models, well, whose data were they built on? What culture and what society? And who's making the decisions for there? And then how is it being something is it regenerative in our society? Is it helping the community, or is it extracting data, extracting resources? And I think Fatima talks a lot too about like environmental effects, which I'll let you speak on. But there's so many considerations.
Yeah, I think that when we planned for this session, it was really hard because you can go in so many different lanes when it comes to this conversation about how this is impacting folks. I think there's, I think for me it is, AI is producing and mirroring, if not perpetuating, a lot of the inequities that already exist and a lot of the human biases that already exist in the work that we do, and primarily through two components: the training data that is being put into AI, and then the programming errors that really exist. And so, who is programming your data? You heard this morning about a lot of the real life scenarios of individuals being ruled out when it comes to applications, right? There was a Brookings study done where 85.1% of candidates that were screened were pushed forward because they had more white-sounding names than their counterparts, right? The more terrifying statistic is that 90% of those recommendations that AI put forward were actually taken into consideration, despite a human being's judgment, right? And so a lot of individuals are just taking whatever the output on is and just going off of it and running with it, right? And so that's the scary part about it. And so I think there's a need to slow down. We also understand that, with this desire to be more and more efficient, the governance is lagging. And we see 3/4 of companies that are admitting to the fact that their governance is not in place yet, right? And so how do we, again, make sure that we're going back to slowing down? I know a lot of folks in this room are super excited about a lot of that is possible. I'm really excited about it, but sometimes I get a little worried, right? Just yesterday at a phone call, I was trying to find a new primary in town. Other primary left, needed to find new primary in town, and the receptionist said to me, you won't get in until 2 months from now. And I said, okay, but he said, I'll put you on the wait list. And then he said to me, our computer system's going to know before I do. That's AI, right? That's a great use of AI. First come, first serve, right? Eliminating bias in that opportunity. However, when it comes to AI being utilized for health care and making healthcare decisions, that is terrifying. So I think it's really important for us to have a really hard conversation about when to use it, when not to use it.
I like that. Let's peel back that onion just a little bit. The lagging comment, right? Is there something AI can't replace that humans just do so well right now? And if there isn't, where do we play? Like, where do we show up?
I would say, my first thought is judgment and relationships. You can't have this that's happening on stage. You can't replicate this.
When we just talked about empathy and even the use of large language models in therapy, There are some short-term benefits, and I believe that studies trying to look at more long-term, we're not that long out, but looking at those are finding that those relationships are not the same quality as you might develop with a provider. And empathy is so important for maintaining our connections and building our community. So replacing that with AI when it's not adding to the situation is something that probably is not going to have great effects.
You know, I'm probably going to misquote this, but Thomas Sowell has this fantastic little pick that he pulls in, and it's around there's no absolute solutions. There's only trade-offs. And we use trade-offs in so many different ways. But I'd like to explore the concept of trade-offs in this like cultural, social environment right here. So either one of you, open question. Do you think there are any cultural effects of AI that organizations are still under considering right now?
So I have a favorite example from dentistry.
We love examples.
Wonderful. And hopefully dentistry also. So there's software in dentistry that can help dentists detect cavities. And the software, the vendor, will recommend how often the dentist should spot check the AI decision. So that is your human in the loop. They are not there for every decision because that would take the efficiency down significantly. So they say spot check it around 20 to 50% of the time. And that's great. The way they found that number was that percentage of checking leads to continued use of the software by the dentist, which is a great metric for a vendor, not necessarily the right metric for the dentist and for the patients. And you can consider, different cultures of communities where a dentist might have their practice. So if you have a dentist that is in a community where people can't afford a lot of dentistry, or maybe it's really hard to get in, they don't have enough dentists, so they're only getting care maybe once every few years. That dentist might want to be much more aggressive with treating cavities because they're not going to see their patient again for a while. Whereas there might be a dentist in another community where people are in every 6 months, and they would prefer to take approach of wait and see. I'll see you in 6 months. I don't want to do anything invasive yet. And that dentist is going to want to make different decisions than that AI might. The training data is not public, right? There's the proprietary algorithm here, so they don't even really know how it's calibrated, and they can calibrate it themselves, I'm sure, a little bit, but still understanding the explainability of that system is really critical. So having an understanding of the culture in which you're deploying that AI, what kind of risks and trade-offs that community is going to accept is really important.
Does that spark for you, Fatima? What trade-off are you hearing there?
A lot of what I hear is just, a lot of the work that I do is with communities and specifically with communities of color. And so I think about a lot of the disparities that already exist. And again, how are we perpetuating a lot of those historical inequities? And so when you were talking about that example, I think about, another example that came to mind, which was costs. So in healthcare, a lot of folks will make decisions based on costs of care and treatment that have taken place. And so I remember reading a study and I was a little horrified by it again, because they're making decisions saying that, the Black population, because they're spending less money on that community, that they don't need it. They don't need additional services because, hey, they're not spending as much money. That's really discouraging because that's not true, right? And so, again, I think it's important for us to take those pauses and always question the data that is being pushed out to us, and that our judgment really needs to come into play. And I think that's something that, again, when we talked about what can't be replaced, that can't be replaced.
Yeah, how else do we become responsible there? What else do we need to think about?
I think, Katie can probably talk about this a bit more, but again, I think we've got a lot of companies that are very eager to jump to asking their employees to be, again, more efficient and more efficient and more efficient. Lots of concerns there also with leading to burnout. But I think that you need, before you implement a new tool, you need to do your due diligence, especially when you're working with vendors, rather than just trusting the vendor and having them present to you and say, hey, these are the outcomes that you're going to see, or here's the ROI. Take that intentional pause to say, okay, well, what have you trained your AI on? What is it being programmed to do? We spoke this morning about that example of Amazon, Google, many of these companies who have used AI in their hiring practices to roll out and filter through applications. And, in those instances is when you see that, male applications are pushed forward for technical roles because they use language, or they're programmed to pull out applications that say things like, I executed, or I did XYZ, right? Whereas your female counterparts are maybe using more of a we or a teamwork model or framework, or in terms of how they're pitching the work that they've done. We need to be more conscientious about how we're working with these tools. And again, it begins with having those conversations and being at the table. And Katie and I have talked a lot about, who are the stakeholders that are at that table. And, you just mentioned to me, like, what if females were at that table? That likely would not have happened, right? Someone probably would have raised their hand and said, hey, you should probably think of this before you roll something out, and a tool that's going to, overrepresent a certain community versus another community.
Same thing happened with the Apple Card when that rolled out. Then the credit limits for men were higher than for women, and they clearly did not have the right stakeholder group put together. I am a fellow with a nonprofit called For Humanity. We write auditable criteria for AI legislation. And one of the core components of what we do is a concept called diverse inputs and multi-stakeholder feedback. And what this is a group of people, we call them risk assessors, and they are going to be looking at the model from design through deployment and ongoing monitoring of that algorithm. And the point is to have people from different experiences, different education, protected demographics, so that you can get a really big picture from a lot of different viewpoints about what risks might be present in your model. And if you don't have those folks in there, you have blind spots. So having those diverse inputs, multi-stakeholder feedback is folks from, yes, in your company, from cross-functional areas, also could be people from the community, people who the algorithm is actually going to be affecting is really important to put together, and it's a key part of responsible risk management, and I would love to see more of that. One thing that I did with an ISACA group was we looked at their COBIT framework and brought in that concept of DI and MSF. So if you are trying to get a focus group that is going to help advise your company, where can you fit this into your framework? And it's actually not very hard to do. You can take whatever policy or framework you have at your company, sit down with a few people and see, okay, which part of this standard or this process can we say we should bring in diverse inputs? And that is a really, really great start to building that practice of how you're thinking about tech.
Well, I promise to bring in some more diverse inputs and also be a risk mitigator myself and to work my due diligence. But I think I speak for everyone here when I say due diligence is hard unless you add a little bit of fun with it as well, right? So how do we have a little fun with this while we're trying to be responsible people here?
I mean, we were just having this conversation, but when you talk about, focus groups, think about your companies. How many of your companies have, and I oversee a lot of our employee resource groups, and so how many of your companies have employee resource groups? Most of you, right? And so these groups are your built-in stakeholders. Traditionally what you're going to see is you're going to see a more diverse representation within your employee resource groups just because they naturally are set up that way. And so how do you bring in those folks? And oftentimes what I see is a lot of those employee resource groups are actually made up of individuals that are in entry-level roles that end up being a little more diverse in terms of their representation to begin with. And so how do you bring them in? Not only is it an opportunity for them to weigh in on a decision, but it's also a growth opportunity for them. So leverage that. Allow them to be in on the front end. I oftentimes think of I don't want to be a part of a large decision, enterprise-wide decision, right? Give them that opportunity to be a part of that conversation. Make it fun. Folks want to be innovative. They want to be creative. They want to throw things at the wall and see what sticks, right? And so when you're trying to test something, these groups are meeting all the time anyways. Put it in front of them. Get their feedback and see how things shake out.
I want to jump in real quick. I really like that that's like an inside view of an organization, ability to have an opportunity, contribute. What's the outside view? How do we think from it from a societal perspective? Kate, if you have something here, I'd love to hear it.
I was thinking about snacks as a way to make this more fun.
Perfect.
So let me transition. So the question was, how can we, from an outside perspective, how do we think about making it fun?
And have snacks.
And have snacks. So I think part of what makes something fun, or at least reinforcing enough that you come back and come do it, is that you see that your work has real effects. If you're doing something in a silo and nothing gets done, it's pretty disappointing and it's demotivating. I don't know if I have a really great answer for this, but if we can, as community members, intentionally build community and build relationships and work with people so that we can actually make change in our communities and see that there is some effect to this work we put in. I think that's fun. Might not be quite the same as a pizza party, but yeah.
Pizza, snacks as well.
Snacks,
we can combine them a little bit. Well, if we're going to have a little fun and we're also going to be responsible here, what about this idea that no one ever hands us this roadmap to the successes and the fun points in our careers, right? We have to find that for ourselves. And AI kind of feels the same way a little bit. We have to find out where we need to experiment, where we need to think through the ethics, where we need to show up in the right way. So if you were to model a little curiosity, a little courage, what would you do when you're experimenting with AI? And also, how would you protect yourself with that as well?
So at an organizational level, one of the things that we hear a lot is that we don't want to have regulation because we want to innovate. The converse, I think, is actually more true, is that when you understand the regulation, when you understand the guidelines, then you can innovate more bravely. So starting any project with a firm understanding of where your ethics are, what your objective is, what risk is going to be acceptable so that you can achieve your goals and still be aligned at the end of the day with your morals, versus what risks do you need to mitigate, or what risks are simply not acceptable. And understanding that framework can give you a really great runway in front of you to go have fun and innovate and work with your team and try some things that are new and exciting and that are not necessarily going to tank your business strategy or make it hard for you to sleep at the end of the day, depending on what kind of company you're in.
Okay, so make it real for me. Give me an example of an acceptable risk. Because we might have different risk tolerances here, right?
Yeah, we might. Well, I mean, it depends on what kind of company and what kind of situation, right? So if we want to look at finance, it is completely unacceptable to leak any personal data. You are going to be completely tanked. If I am using a system to collect email addresses and names to sign up for my entrepreneurial service and those leak, not great, but not quite the same as somebody's social security number.
You want me to jump in?
Only if you can, but yeah.
One thing that came to mind when you were talking about, or when you had initially asked the question about, training and adoption and where do you start is, a lot of this, you folks are here, but how many folks have never touched AI, right? That are in your company that are scared and worried about using AI. I think it's also important for us to bring folks along on the journey. We do know that women are significantly less likely to adopt AI than their male counterparts. Many studies will say about 25% less likely to do so. And very much so for two main reasons. One is the ethics behind it is scary, right? And then also this fear of judgment that they are going to be judged for using it versus their male counterparts that might not worry about that, right? And so when you see this lower adoption rate, what are the long-term effects of that, right? You're continuing to perpetuate the inequities that exist, the wealth gap that exists, right? And so, and also, growth and opportunities on the road, promotions, so on and so forth. And so, again, how do we make sure that we're bringing folks along on this journey? And so if you're working in a workplace, what does it look like to make sure that folks are actually trained on the AI tools, and that you, if you expect them to do so and expect them to know and have that kind of baseline foundational understanding, have you built it into job descriptions? And then if you do so, who are you leaving out? Who has access to be able to learn the tools, to be able to apply for those roles? And again, how are you perpetuating some of those things? And so if you are going down this route and you've brought in a new vendor within your workplace and you're working with them, make sure that your teams are trained on how to utilize it and that you're bringing folks along on that journey as well. And one thing I will add also is, working very closely with your legal and compliance teams. When you think about AI adoption, also consider, folks with disabilities. There's new ADA guidelines, I think, that came out a couple of years ago after an EEOC, filing or an anti-discrimination filing when it came to hiring. But I will say this because, how many of your companies actually will provide the accommodations necessary for new folks joining your teams to understand AI as well. So lots to unpack there, but also very, very important to think about.
I feel like there's a gold nugget here. Fatima, how do you actually bring someone along? Give me an example of where you brought someone along in this AI journey.
I think a lot of it is it's scary, right? If you have a new tool in the workplace, I think, one thing that we've deployed is making sure that we start top down. So making sure that your executives truly understand the process and that they have time carved out to really learn the process. I would never expect, an employee to learn something that I myself have not learned first. And so really teaching and coaching them so that they can be good stewards and then rolling it down. A lot of it is play. Again, how do you make it fun in the workplace, right? Creating focus groups to be able to play and open sessions that allow you to keep the heart of the work there. So making sure that we have spaces that we've created for us to have conversations and testings and run over to Katie's screen and say, hey, what are you working on? And so on and so forth, so that you don't feel so much alone in the process and that you keep that human connection going throughout.
Katie, trigger word, steward. Give it to me. How do we be good stewards here?
Tech stewardship. So I'll start with this example in the workplace. So part of this training, and this can be role-based training too, to make sure that people really understand how this is fitting in with their role and what they need to know, not just about how to use it, but even enough about the algorithm to understand how it's working and understand where it won't work well, because that is also really important. We have seen some companies that are like, hey, you need to have AI take over 20% of your workflow this year. Your bonus depends on it, which is bananas. Really great way to have your company data leaked into ChatGPT, to have all sorts of things go off the rails. And if leadership can be more specific about identifying where you're going to have an ROI, what you're measuring, and where you can see improvements, and then be really specific with how we're going to use that. And that is also part of making sure that women, for example, are brought along with it, because instead of, which this is already in the literature, women actually being, not just afraid of, but women actually being perceived as less competent than men because of AI use, but making it something that is a level playing field because it's expected to use AI in these situations in this company. So instead of leaving that up to the company culture to sort out on its own. So tech stewardship beyond that also is about understanding what we've been talking about with like what data is being used and where there might be bias, and how we can reflect on how we're using technology within our organizations or within our communities to have a positive impact. And that isn't just a one-time thing, it's an iterative continual cycle of reflecting on what we're doing, is this working for us, and even identifying, early on, this is the outcome I expect to see, and then being honest, am I seeing that outcome, or am I seeing some things that maybe are changing the risk and benefit trade-off?
Yeah, leaders almost ignoring the noise a little bit, right? What are the signals do we need to keep in mind? Do leaders need to keep in mind when they're thinking about this?
Can you ask that another way?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of noise in AI right now. There's which platforms we need to use, which platforms we don't need to use. There's individuals asking us, what can we do? What should we do? Right? To me, that's a lot of noise coming in. I want to know if we go a little bit beyond the noise and we think about the key signals that help drive some of the decisions that we need to make. What are one or two of those signals, or what should they be?
So really starting with understanding what is your business problem. You don't go and say, hey, this new model dropped, what can we do with it? You want to start with, what are my processes? Where am I having a challenge? What do I need to improve that would help my business? And diving into that, we do manufacturing workshops in Milwaukee where we walk organizations through this. And the answer is not always AI. And sometimes the answer is, you need paper and a pencil and you need to talk to Greg over there in the next department. But sometimes it is AI, and we have to understand what we are measuring, where we can go with AI, and make sure that that measurement is improving again. So that following that thread is going to make sure that your resources are focused on something that is actually productive. And then, employees are excited about AI and they want to experiment, and that actually can be really great. Give them the safe way to do that. Give them the enterprise accounts that they need. Let them have data sets that are contained and safe so that they can experiment. And if they come up with a great idea, you just had some R&D, congratulations. And then your team can pilot it and see if it's something that you want to move forward.
Fatima, this question's for you. How can teams and individuals use technology a little bit more intentionally, right? How can we be a little bit more intentional about what we want to do and what we want to do it with?
Yeah, so I work with a lot of teams and leaders in terms of coaching. So again, how do you make sure that employees feel seen, heard, and valued? And a lot of that work is, one-on-one coaching. And so one of the tools that we actually use is called Tenor AI. And it's a pretty neat tool because it keeps the human at its core, but it's helping leaders and coaching leaders on how to practice and almost role play. Well, essentially role play difficult conversations. And so if we have a lab leader that's struggling with his or her team that aren't making goals, and they need to have a difficult conversation, how do they do so? And so they come to me and say, hey, we're not meeting our goals, we're not meeting our targets, or hey, I've taken a look at employee engagement survey data and it shows that your team is scoring far lower than they were the past quarter. Why is that? And that leader doesn't have an answer for me. Well, the answer is, let's go back to your team and find out what's going on, right? Let's have those difficult conversations. And oftentimes we have leaders that have never or are uncomfortable having those conversations, and so they want to play them out. So Tenor AI actually allows you to do just that. You put in the scenario, and then it acts as if it's the employee, and so then you have a conversation, and you say, hey, hey, Kate, I'm really struggling with X, Y, Z, and then it actually responds back to you. And you hash out this role-playing experiment. It has shown to be tremendously helpful for our leaders. And so I think, with your earlier question of, AI being thrown, so many different options when it comes to AI, I think it's really important for you to take one at a time. Figure out exactly what works for your company and what doesn't. You don't need to use AI just to use AI. Use it for a focused area and problem scenario within your workplace. And for us, in my area of work, it's been employee engagement work. And when we see lower scores in certain areas, why is that? And then how do we tackle?
How else could we use AI to help us with work instead of just giving us more to do?
I'm going to sound like a broken record, because it's really about identifying your challenge and looking for a solution, and if that is AI, great, and then measure it to make sure that it really is the right thing.
But I mean, you're right. AI, if you use Copilot in your workplace, how many meetings do you go to that are recorded, and then it generates the transcript, and then it tells you all the action items, and then you miss another meeting because you're in another meeting at that same time, and then you have to go back and reread the transcript or the action items. There's so much to filter through, right? AI has become very, very helpful in the workplace, but it's also forced us to have to download and read more and more, and so it becomes very clouded very, very quickly. And so again, I think it's important for us to use it where we need it, and not overuse it.
Well, I always like to adopt a beginner's mindset. So some broken records can be fixed, and they could be your favorite song, and you could just listen to them again and again and again, and hopefully you unlock something a little bit fun. I'd love to go to the audience for a few questions. I have a few more teed up for us, though, if that doesn't happen, but I know there's a lot of burning curiosity out there, and I want to get some in before we run out of time here. So I see a hand up everywhere. I'm going to jump in. Let's do this.
All right, this is mainly for Katie, because Katie, you are speaking my love language about what is the business challenge, right? It should always come back to that. But do you have any strategies that have worked for you, or even ideas of how to have that conversation with your leadership when they are pushing heavily for, we need to integrate AI, and you need to kind of give me that report of where you've integrated AI, because we need to show how great we are integrating AI, right? That's the message that we are getting. And just looking for some strategies, because we've said what's the business problem we're trying to solve, right? We've come up with some strategies for our team members, right, to figure out what their business challenges are, but they just want more and more and more, and it's like, but we don't have it. So I'm just wondering if you have any strategies that have worked for you on those.
You're looking for the leadership whisperer.
Yes, where are they?
Which probably could be an entire panel. That's a really good question. I'm not sure that I have magic strategy for that. I think doing what you're doing makes a lot of sense. Like, hey, what is our business strategy? What are we trying to solve here? And when leadership, I mean, who are they getting the pressure from? Up, another level or two above, who doesn't really understand what all of the risks are that come along with AI, and how it's not just a magic button that you just install and now everything is more efficient. So if you can find a champion in that level and talk to them and develop that relationship and see if they're able to go and build some capital with other people in the organization that maybe have more leverage to start having those conversations. They might need to even be starting at the board level to change the way that the organization is thinking about that. Good luck.
But we would also like a magic button as well. Who else? Any thoughts? What's your name?
My name is Taylor Fortunato. So I work for ALSAC. We're the fundraising and awareness organization for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. We're based in Memphis, Tennessee. And also based in Memphis, Tennessee is XAI's Colossus Data Center. It was built in a predominantly Black neighborhood and has since sparked a ton of conversation in the city and nationally about the environmental and public health concerns associated with these data centers. So my question for you all is, in your work, what have you seen organizations do to address these concerns, particularly when they're seeing the negative effects of data centers in their own backyard? We're not using XAI's tools, but we are using other tools and have started to get, some concerns from employees.
That's such a tough question because I think everyone's dealing with it. My mom actually lives north of Port Washington, and they're building one of the largest data centers in the state of Wisconsin. And so you're seeing just that. It's happening in rural communities and predominantly communities of color as well. And unfortunately, again, as I mentioned earlier, you're perpetuating historical inequities, right? You're going to communities that already didn't have enough resources, and now you're making the problem worse. You're working day and night to put up these data centers. You're getting noise ordinances, all of this coming into play. I think, we're very, very slowly starting to see organizations take a look at, corporate social responsibility or ESG work, but I truly have not seen them build out what I would hope to see. I think they're, as I mentioned earlier, I think that folks are easy adopters and that governance is really, really lagging. I'm very much looking forward to seeing more in that space, but I truly don't have a clear answer for you right now because I don't think organizations know yet.
Leaders and laggards. Love it. I know we have a few questions from our live online audience. Would you like to share one?
Yeah, we have one question here. We're seeing that participation with AI is heavy from those who are in tech roles like engineering or product development, but a lot more quiet on the side of non-tech roles. How have you seen success in encouraging participation from those who aren't in tech-forward roles?
I think it's all about finding, I think a lot of folks that aren't in tech roles don't know how to utilize it or how it might benefit them. And so again, not just using an AI tool to use it, but really showcasing the benefit in their day-to-day. How is it going to make their job a little easier and less redundant so that they can spend more time focusing on strategy and other work. And so I think it's about a lot of education as well. How do you educate folks so that they're not as fearful of the tools? And again, going back to how do we make sure that we're bringing folks along?
Great, thank you.
Katie?
I can add that employers have the opportunity to invest in the education and invest in the folks, the non-tech folks that they already have, understanding that if we have the assumption that using AI, understanding AI is going to make them better in their role. It's very resource intensive to find a new employee. And in fact, as we see more technology use, we might even be valuing more of these soft skills, the creativity, the people who are adaptable and empathetic and have good communication skills. So upskill your employees, give them access to understanding this technology, give them ways that they can start feeling comfortable with it, give them the safe space to do that. And then you can then have that reward of your workforce being modernized.
I saw a wave start over here in the beginning. So I know there's a few more hands that came up. Anyone want to jump in? Promised I wouldn't fall, but.
Hi. I thought it was very interesting what you said about AI in healthcare. I don't work in healthcare, but I know, for example, mammograms are now AI interpreted and other imaging. And I think it's a great opportunity for providers to figure out how they can connect better with their patients, how they can utilize AI. Because what we see today is practices are so overworked, doctors are overworked. They barely spend time talking to their patients, listening to the symptoms. And especially for women, it's always like, oh, it's anxiety. Oh, it's just this. It's just that. So I think the advent of AI in healthcare specifically gives us this opportunity to figure out how to really capitalize on the human connection again. And then what we're seeing also with these short-term therapists, and we're seeing people starting relationships, quote unquote, with chatbots, I think that actually unearths the bigger problem of humanity and society right now, in which we have a lot of lonely people and they're trying to fill that void. So I think hopefully over time we can kind of separate that. Let's focus on right now, at least, what defines us as humans and take advantage of AI, not as another dumb tool, but really figure out how to embed it in a smart way. And I think that goes for work as well, right? How can we use AI? We heard some great presentations, I think yesterday, about Bonusly and trying to figure out how to get the data into people's hands. So I really appreciate that you brought up the healthcare, because I think that's a really big opportunity to connect back to the providers and give people the time they deserve in those really vulnerable moments. So thank you.
Yeah, and I will just add to that. I have a lot of friends that work in radiology, and they are so grateful for AI. There are fewer and fewer radiologists, and so being able to utilize AI to help read through things and for them to just quickly go through things and double check things has been a huge benefit to them, so that they can help more folks. And so there is definitely that pull and tug and pull there of how do you balance it, and to be able to get back to that human connection and that bedside manner that we oftentimes miss out on is going to be huge. So super excited about that aspect.
Got one more. Zach's got it. Zach's got it. He's faster than I am.
Thank you for this discussion so far. You said something, and I wrote it down, and I probably misquoted you when I wrote it down, so I apologize. But when you understand the guardrails and boundaries around AI, you can innovate more briefly, and I love that. But how do you kind of approach guardrails and boundaries when AI is moving so quickly, and as a company, you can't afford to slow down? It feels like I'm often in this reactionary approach, and it's the first time in my career where I'm not being proactive, and so it feels uncomfortable. And is there even a way to get into that proactive approach with AI guardrails?
That's a really great question. I would push back on the idea that we have to innovate as fast as possible, because the risk that comes along with that, exactly as you say, we don't know exactly what might happen then if we don't have the guardrails and we're still figuring out our guardrails. And that can look like a massive cybersecurity breach. That can look like all of your data is leaked. That can look like your customer, your client receives really damaging output from your algorithm. So that is part of thinking through that risk-benefit approach with, what can I tolerate? What risk am I willing to take? I mean, if we didn't take any risks, we wouldn't have any business at all, right? So risk taking is important, but what can I take that aligns with my strategy and aligns with the principles I have for how I will use AI? Then I assess the risk. Can I mitigate some of these? Great. What's left over? Are these acceptable? So really thinking through that process will give you a lot more understanding of when you want to move forward and when you want to hold back. And that's really hard to do when you have leadership that really doesn't understand that and is just saying, no, innovate, innovate, innovate. But is it worth that innovation? Can you withstand the potential, of the risks that you have? So finding that balance is really key.
I'm also hearing be really intentional about what guardrail you want to identify, right?
Yes. Yeah. I used to do a lot of restorative justice work, and a lot of it was asking important questions. And so what is, the who, what, and why? And so reminding yourself that when you are taking on a new project, or when you're asking yourself, am I going to utilize AI? Who is it benefiting? Who is it harming? Who are you leaving out of the conversation? So having, a set of questions to even run through every time you're about to make a decision is also important. And so something, low-hanging fruit to take into consideration when you feel like you've got to work really, really fast.
So I just want to thank the audience for those fantastic questions. I'm hearing a meaningful practice, right? Ask yourself, who's it benefiting? Who's it harming? What do I need to think about? Is there any other small practice you just want to leave everyone with right now that they can be really intentional behind? Say tomorrow. Takes them 5 minutes.
And whose voice is included within that whole process of design and development and deployment?
Double down.
I'm going to double down on that. Who is invited to the table, who is left out, and when you did invite those folks to the table, did they actually have their voice heard? Yeah.
I love that. I'd like to end us off with just a quick lightning round. We get to hear about our panelists, what they do, and what kind of lightens them up and where they work. But I also want to hear a few how they think questions as well. So I'm going to ask you quick lightning round questions. Just give me a one-word or quick sentence answer. You're not allowed to think about it. It has to be the first thing that comes to your mind.
I'm terrible at this.
Yeah, all right. Katie, you're on the hot spot first. Describe your relationship with AI using a type of cheese.
So happy you're going first.
And since technically ice cream is made out of dairy, you can also say ice cream flavor.
This is hard because I love so many different kinds of cheese. I'm going to go with brie.
I heard cheese platter, but brie also works as well. All right, Fatima, if you had to give AI a curfew, what time would it be and why?
I have a newborn who is like 2 years old, so I'm thinking of like witching hour right now, and I think that is the time of day. Like, do your day during the work when you can think clearly, and at night when you need the time, step away.
I think we've got another minute, so we might as well just keep them in the hot seats. Katie, AI has a catchphrase. What is it?
I should be the topic of your next seminar.
Everyone write that down really quickly. Fatima, you said you have a 2-year-old. 2-year-old will one day be...
2 months.
2-month-old, sorry. Your 2-month-old will one day be 5, and you're going to have to explain to them what AI is. So how do you explain AI to a 5-year-old? You've only got a sentence.
No pressure. I mean, they're 5.
Yeah, they don't have very good memories.
Your screen time will be limited.
Well done. Well done. Sage advice. I think even us adults could 5 or 50. I think. Well, thank you for that. The last question, either one of you can answer, or ask each other as well. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
Should we collectively do this?
Yeah.
It
A hot
is
dog is not a sandwich.
That's a CulturCon little thing in the back. Thank you all. Thanks for making this a conversation. I hope you took what you needed.
All right, give it up one more time for our panel.